Scioto County, Ohio, August 14, 1904, 9 in the morning. The skull was on his examination table, and the first thing Dr. Leonard Voss noticed was the light. He had been a practicing dentist in Portsmouth, Ohio since 1891, and in 13 years of practice, he had learned to position his examination lamp at a specific angle to illuminate the interior of a patient's mouth without casting shadow on the posterior molars. He set the lamp now by habit, angling it toward the open jaw, and what the light showed him stopped him as completely as if the floor had given way. He stood with the lamp in his hand for what he later described to his colleague in a letter as perhaps a full minute, not moving, not speaking, looking at what the light was showing him. The jaw had two complete rows of teeth, not one row with supernumerary teeth scattered through it, two independent rows, front to back, each one fully developed and fully erupted. The inner row positioned precisely behind the outer, root systems visible in the lateral section where the jaw had been damaged during excavation. He had seen hyperdontia, extra teeth scattered anomalously through a normal dental arch, perhaps a dozen times in his career. This was not hyperdontia. This was a second complete dentition, running the full arch of the jaw, as deliberate in its arrangement as the outer row. He had never seen it. He had never read of it. He had never been taught that such a thing was anatomically possible in any primate, living or extinct. He was 41 years old. He had a certificate from the Ohio College of Dental Surgery in Cincinnati and a second certificate from the American Dental Association's continuing education program in Chicago. He was not a man who misread a dental arch. He read dental arches for a living. But here is what the Smithsonian Institution and the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society have spent 120 years making sure you never ask about. Portsmouth, Ohio, sits at the confluence of the Scioto and Ohio rivers, at the southern edge of a county that had been one of the most intensively mounded landscapes in North America before the agricultural clearances of the 19th century. The Adena and Hopewell cultures had built extensively across Scioto County for roughly 2,000 years before European contact. The county's mound density was among the highest in Ohio, and the plowing and drainage projects of the post-Civil War agricultural expansion had been turning up burial material with regularity since the 1870s. By 1904, the practical protocol in Scioto County when construction or plowing exposed a mound burial was informal but consistent. The foreman sent word to the Portsmouth City Clerk's office. Someone from the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society in Columbus was notified, and the material was either boxed for institutional transfer or left in place, depending on the scale of the find. The skull on Leonard Voss's examination table had come from a mound exposure at the Thornton Farm, 4 miles north of Portsmouth on the Scioto River bottleneck, where a drainage ditch project had cut through the base of a low mound that had been plowed flat over the previous 30 years, but whose earthen core had remained intact beneath the surface. The drainage contractor, a 47-year-old man named James Holloway, who had done drainage work across Scioto County for 2 decades, had pulled the skull from the cut face of the mound base with his own hands that morning and driven it to Portsmouth wrapped in burlap because he had never seen a skull of those dimensions and he wanted a professional opinion before he proceeded. The dimensions were what had sent him to a dentist rather than to a physician. The skull was large. Holloway estimated the cranium at roughly twice the volume of his own, which was an estimate that Voss would confirm within narrower margins once he had his measurement instruments on it. But what had struck Holloway immediately, before he picked it up, was the jaw. He had seen animal skulls. He had seen human skulls. He had seen the large-jawed skulls of old men whose bone density accumulated through decades of heavy jaw use. None of them had looked like this. The jaw on the mound skull was proportionally massive, even relative to the outsized cranium, and the front face of it, the surface Holloway saw first, looking down at the cut bank of the drainage ditch, showed 2 distinct rows of teeth, one behind the other, both fully intact. He wrapped it in burlap and drove to Portsmouth, and asked for the dentist. Leonard Voss spent 3 hours with the skull on August 14, 1904. He measured it with the calipers he used for dental archwork, which were precise to within 1/4 of a millimeter. The cranium, measured at its widest point, was 9.5 inches across. His own skull, which he measured for comparison, was 6.25. The jaw, measured at the widest point of the outer dental arch, was 5.75 inches. His own jaw measured 3.5. The skull height from the base of the occiput to the highest point of the cranial vault was 10.1/8 inches. His own was 7.25. The dental examination took the longest. He examined both rows of the mandibular teeth, the lower jaw, and both rows of the maxillary teeth, the upper jaw, with his dental mirror and probe. The outer row in both jaws was complete, 32 teeth in standard arrangement, consistent with a mature adult of advanced age, showing significant wear on the occlusal surfaces that indicated decades of heavy use. The inner row showed a different wear pattern. The inner teeth were also fully erupted and fully developed, but their occlusal surfaces showed less wear, and several of them showed a distinctive lateral scoring pattern he did not recognize from any dental context he knew. He examined the root systems visible in the broken section of the lower jaw. Both rows had independent, fully developed root systems extending into the bone. The inner row was not a malformation of the outer row's roots. It was a separate dentition. He wrote to his colleague that evening. The letter went to Dr. Albert Fenton of the Cincinnati Dental College faculty, with whom Voss had maintained a professional correspondence since his graduation in 1891. He described the skull's dimensions, the double dentition, the root system separation, and his professional conclusion that the specimen represented an anatomical configuration not present in any known human population, living or fossil, and that it required examination by an institutional specialist in craniofacial anatomy. He asked Fenton to advise on the appropriate institutional contact. Fenton replied within a week. He recommended contact with the Smithsonian Institution's Division of Physical Anthropology in Washington, which had been the primary institutional repository for anomalous human skeletal material since the Bureau of American Ethnology's founding in 1879. He included the name of a specific individual in the division, whose work on Ohio Valley skeletal material he was familiar with. Voss wrote to Washington. He described the skull, gave the measurements, described the double dentition, and offered to send the specimen by registered mail for institutional examination. He included a copy of his measurements. The response from Washington arrived 19 days after Voss's letter. It was signed by a division registrar and thanked Voss for his communication. It stated that the division received a significant volume of inquiry regarding anomalous skeletal material, and that the specimen he described was consistent with documented cases of severe hyperdontia, a pathological condition producing supernumerary teeth in a normal dental arch, and that no institutional examination was required. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph noted that the division would be grateful if the specimen could be transferred to the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society in Columbus for regional cataloging. Voss wrote back the same day. He had 13 years of professional practice in dental examination, and he was not describing hyperdontia. He described, again, the independent root systems. He described the wear pattern differential between the outer and inner rows. He included a diagram of the lower jaw's cross-section, hand-drawn, showing the 2 independent root systems and their distinct angles of development. He sent the letter registered. He received no reply to the second letter. He sent a third in November 1904, asking for acknowledgement of receipt. No reply. He wrote to Albert Fenton in December, describing the institutional non-response. Fenton wrote back that the Smithsonian's Division of Physical Anthropology had recently been reorganized under new administrative oversight following a review of its collection management practices, and that correspondence delays were common in the transition period. The skull itself remained in Voss's possession through the autumn of 1904, while he waited for the institutional response that never came. In late November, a man he had not previously met arrived at his Portsmouth office without an appointment. The man identified himself as a field agent for the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society and said the society had been notified of a dental anomaly specimen in Scioto County and had sent him to facilitate transfer. He had a letter on society letterhead. He had a wooden box with padded interior specifically sized for a cranial specimen. Voss gave him the skull. He asked for a receipt. The man wrote one on a page torn from the letter's verso. Voss kept the receipt. The Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society's accession records for the period October through December 1904 contain no entry for a Scioto County mound skull. A search of the Society's Physical Anthropology Holdings Catalog, conducted by the independent researcher Gordon Ashby in the autumn of 2020, found no specimen matching Voss's description in any accessible part of the Society's collection. The Society's response to an inquiry from Ashby stated that pre-1920 accession records were incompletely preserved due to a storage reorganization in the 1940s, and that a comprehensive search could not be guaranteed. The man who arrived with the wooden box and the Society letterhead is not named in any Society field agent record for that period that has been made accessible. Voss kept the receipt. He also kept copies of all 4 letters he had written, to Fenton, to the Smithsonian twice, and to Fenton again. He kept the diagram of the cross-sectioned lower jaw. He kept his measurement records, written in the same format as his patient records, in his clinical ledger for August 1904. The ledger, the letters, and the diagram passed to his son, Robert Voss, after Leonard's death in 1934, and from Robert to a granddaughter, Marion Voss Archer of Lancaster, Ohio, who donated the contents of her family papers to the Fairfield County Historical Society in 1977. The Voss professional papers are in the Society's collection. The August 1904 clinical ledger entry, the 4 letters, and the cross-section diagram are in it. The anatomical impossibility at the center of Leonard Voss's clinical record is not resolved by the hyperdontia explanation the Smithsonian's registrar offered in 2 paragraphs in the autumn of 1904. Hyperdontia, the presence of extra teeth beyond the standard dental complement, is a documented pathological condition occurring in a small percentage of the human population. It produces isolated supernumerary teeth, typically peg-shaped and poorly rooted, positioned irregularly within or adjacent to the standard dental arch. It does not produce a second complete dental arch, with fully developed roots running parallel to and independent of the first. The distinction is not one of degree, it is one of kind. What Voss described, and what his diagram documents, is not a more severe version of a known condition. It is a structural configuration that has no precedent in the dental literature of his era or of any subsequent era. The global parallel in the paleoanthropological record is the dental configuration reported in several Homo naledi specimens recovered from the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, a species whose anatomical mixture of primitive and derived features has not been fully explained by the standard hominid phylogeny. Several Homo naledi individuals showed dental crowding patterns suggesting the retention of a developmental program producing teeth in excess of the standard human complement, though not the full double arch configuration Voss described. The comparison does not explain the Scioto County skull. It establishes that the human developmental program for tooth production has produced, in some lineages, configurations that exceed the standard model. The Tartarian hypothesis names the lineage that produced the Scioto County skull, a pre-Columbian population in the Ohio Valley with anatomical features distinct from any population the official record assigns to this region, whose skeletal remains were systematically collected and removed by federal institutional agents in the period 1870 through 1930, and whose existence the Smithsonian's Division of Physical Anthropology treated as an administrative matter to be handled through standard specimen transfer, rather than as a scientific question to be investigated. The Thornton Farm drainage project that exposed the mound base in August 1904 was one of 11 drainage projects in Scioto County between 1900 and 1910 that cut through documented or suspected mound sites. Of the 11, 7 produced burial material that was reported to the Ohio State Archaeological and Historical Society. Of those 7, 4 resulted in formal society field visits and documented specimen transfer. None of the 4 field visit reports describes anomalous cranial material of the type Voss examined. The 3 that produced no formal field visit record include the Thornton Farm project. The Society's administrative log for August 1904 records the Thornton Farm notification, but no follow-up field visit. The man who arrived at Voss's office in November 1904 with a Society letterhead and a purpose-built wooden box was not conducting a Society field visit. The Society has no record of him. The Thornton Farm property changed hands 7 times between 1904 and 1962. In 1962, 12 of the 48 acres comprising the original mound site were acquired by an Ohio incorporated company that dissolved in 1969. Its assets, including the 12 Thornton Farm acres, were transferred at dissolution to a limited liability company registered in Delaware, whose registered agent in Wilmington traces through 2 intermediary corporate services firms to a federal contractor whose primary client base has consisted of government land management agencies since its founding in 1958. The Delaware entity has held the 12 acres without agricultural or commercial activity since 1969. A no trespassing notice has been on the access road to those acres since at least 1974, the earliest date documented in the Scioto County Recorder's property inspection records. A motion-activated sensor was added to the fence line in 2018. No permit for the sensor installation appears in the county's electrical permit database. The receipt the man wrote on the back of his letterhead when he took the skull from Voss's office in November 1904 reads in its entirety, "Received from Leonard Voss, DDS, 1 cranial specimen, Scioto County origin." The receipt has no date, it has no name. It has a signature that is illegible. Voss kept it because he kept everything, because he was a man who had built his professional life on documentation, and because he understood at some level, in November 1904, that the illegible signature and the absent date were not administrative oversights. They were a design. The receipt is in the Fairfield County Historical Society. The ledger is in the Fairfield County Historical Society. The diagram is in the Fairfield County Historical Society in Lancaster, Ohio. They have been there since 1977. The skull has been in a wooden box somewhere for 120 years in a collection that has no record of receiving it. Leonard Voss, 41 years old, August 14th, 1904. His examination lamp was at the angle he had set 1,000 times before, the light falling on the inside of the jaw the way it fell on every jaw he examined. And what it showed him was not what jaws contained. He stood with the lamp in his hand for perhaps a full minute. Then he set it down and picked up his calipers. He was a dentist. He measured what was in front of him. He wrote the numbers down. The numbers are in Lancaster, Ohio. The skull is not. The watchmaker who took the mechanism apart the following year in Allegheny County could not reassemble what he disassembled. He and Voss never met. They were working on different impossibilities in different states. The record they left behind is the same kind of record. The professional man, the precise instrument, the number that should not exist, written in the ledger that outlasted everything else.